I'm not really the type to post online, but something happened about 6 months ago that I still can't shake. My name's Lauren, I'm 31, and I live with my fiancé, Mark, in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Boise, Idaho. At the time, we were both working remote. Mark in tech support, me as a freelance copywriter, so we spent a lot of time at home. We just bought the place the year before, a modest 2-story brick house at the end of a cul-de-sac, the kind of street where people wave to each other and let their kids ride bikes without a worry. It felt safe, comfortable, until one random Tuesday evening. It was around 6:30 p.m. when the doorbell rang. Mark and I were on the couch, still in our work clothes, eating leftover Thai food and watching reruns. I remember being slightly annoyed. We weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, this young guy was standing there. Early 20s, clean cut, maybe a little too clean cut. He wore a college hoodie, University of Oregon, I think, a baseball cap, and carried a blue backpack slung over one shoulder. He smiled big, friendly, like the type of guy who probably ran student council in high school. Said his name was Tyler. He told me he was going around the neighborhood for a college fundraiser, trying to raise money for some leadership initiative thing. He had a laminated pamphlet and everything. Seemed legit. Mark came to the door with me and we stood there talking to him for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Tyler was polite, upbeat, and asked if he could come in and quickly show us a short video on his tablet. It was optional, he said, but more engaging than just reading. I said no politely and he didn't push. But I noticed he kept glancing past us into the house, specifically toward our living room, where our TV was mounted and some shelves held a few electronics. He made a comment like, "Nice setup in there," with a little laugh. I brushed it off, figuring he was just being friendly. We gave him $5. He thanked us like we'd just changed his life and walked off down the street. We didn't think about it again. Not until the next night. It was about 1:15 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. I shot up in bed so fast my chest hurt. Mark was already halfway out of the sheets. It wasn't a little sound, it was sharp, violent, like someone had thrown a brick through a window. Then I heard footsteps, more than one pair, heavy and fast, coming from downstairs. My heart started racing so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Mark whispered, "Stay here," and grabbed the baseball bat he kept in the closet. I wanted to scream at him not to go down there, but my throat locked up. All I could do was listen. I crept out of bed a few seconds later, heart pounding in my ears, and tiptoed to the hallway, crouching by the stairs. I could see Mark's shadow move along the wall downstairs, slow, careful steps. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low, tense, but unmistakably male. 3 of them, I think. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I caught one word clearly. Upstairs. That word flipped something inside me. I ran back to the bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering as quietly as I could that someone had broken into our house. The operator told me to stay on the line. Then I heard a loud thud downstairs, followed by the shatter of something. Our coffee table, maybe? I don't remember making the decision to hide, but the next thing I knew, I was inside the walk-in closet, crouched behind the clothes, trying not to make a sound. I could hear Mark yelling something from downstairs. He was trying to scare them off, saying the cops were on their way, that he was armed, but the voices didn't stop. I heard someone yell back, and then a struggle, a crash, a grunt, something heavy falling. I covered my mouth and started crying quietly. It was the kind of fear that makes your whole body go cold, like your blood is freezing one vein at a time. And then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Deliberate. Slow. The footsteps paused outside our bedroom door. I heard the doorknob rattle. Thank God we locked it. Then a bang. Someone was trying to kick it in. Not frantically, just testing it, like they weren't in a rush. That scared me more than anything. They weren't panicked. They were methodical. I pressed myself deeper into the closet, practically curled under a hanging coat, still clutching my phone, whispering updates to the 911 operator. She kept asking me to stay calm, told me officers were close. Then I heard someone mutter something outside the door, and the footsteps went back down. It was quiet for a few seconds. I held my breath. Then more glass breaking, this time from the back of the house. Turns out they bailed when they heard sirens approaching. The police got there within 2 minutes. The front window was smashed in, and one of the patio doors in the back had been shattered too. Mark was bruised. He'd been knocked into a table but fought one of them off. They were all wearing masks and gloves, so no fingerprints, no faces. But here's the thing. One of the officers walked around with us to check what was missing. They had gone straight for the electronics. Our TV, a few tablets, Mark's laptop. They didn't wander, they didn't rummage. They knew exactly where to go. And then it hit me, hard enough to make my knees feel weak. That kid, Tyler. He wasn't a student. He was scouting the place. I told the cops about him right away. Gave them the exact time he came by, what he looked like, what he said. They said they'd check for any doorbell camera footage in the neighborhood, maybe catch him on someone else's cam. Ours had been down for weeks. We kept putting off getting it fixed. Classic. A detective followed up a few days later, asked if we still had the pamphlet he gave us. We did. It was sitting in a junk drawer in the kitchen. He took it, said they'd look into whether the fundraiser even existed. Spoiler, it didn't. Total fake. He'd probably printed the flyer himself. And the more we thought about it, the more details started clicking into place. How casual he was. How focused his eyes were when he looked past us into the living room. He wasn't selling anything. He was casing the place. Mark started staying up later after that. Slept with the bat by the bed. We got cameras installed on every corner of the house. Motion lights. We even got a dog. One of those big German Shepherd mixes from a rescue. His name's Max, and just having him around makes us feel a little safer. But I'll tell you what, neither of us sleeps like we used to. That experience broke something in both of us. It's not just fear, it's that violation, you know? Someone was in our home. They knew where we slept. They stood outside our bedroom door. I still get chills thinking about it, especially when I see a young guy with a backpack knocking on someone's door. I always wonder, how many other houses did he scout that week? The worst part? They never caught them. The cops said it happens more than people think. These guys pose as students, charity workers, delivery drivers, whatever it takes to get you to open the door. They memorize layouts, spot weak points, and come back when they know you're most vulnerable. And there's usually more than one. That shook me bad. It made me paranoid. For weeks, I'd flinch every time I heard a car slow down outside. And if I'm being honest, I still do sometimes. Trauma has a way of hanging around like a bad smell. You try to clean it out, but it lingers in the corners. So yeah, if someone knocks on your door with a clipboard and a smile, don't feel bad for saying no. Don't invite them in. Don't let their charm make you ignore that gut feeling. We almost did, and it could have been so much worse. We were lucky. They were after stuff, not blood. But the way they moved, the way they paused at that locked door. If we hadn't locked it, if Mark hadn't gotten up fast, if the cops were a few minutes later, I don't know what would have happened. I don't want to know. I was 17 when it happened, living with my girlfriend Haley in her aunt's guest house behind a quiet row of homes in southern Oregon. Her aunt traveled a lot for work, and pretty much let us stay there rent-free as long as we didn't trash the place. We were both finishing high school, me working part-time at a gas station, Haley doing remote classes after dropping out for a semester. It was one of those years that felt like it was just about survival. We didn't party or go out much. Most nights were spent on that beat-up old couch with microwave dinners and reruns playing in the background. This happened on a Thursday. I remember that because Haley always FaceTimed her mom on Thursdays and forgot to plug in her phone after, which ended up being important later. That night was cold, wind pushing hard against the siding. We were watching The Others, ironically, and half asleep under a blanket when we heard the knocking. At first it didn't even sound like a knock, more like someone trying not to be heard. A soft, desperate tapping. We paused the movie and sat up, looking at each other like, "Did you hear that too?" Then it came again. Louder this time. 3 rapid knocks, then a pause, then 5 more. It was weird. Not the kind of knock you'd expect from someone you knew. Haley froze, and I remember her saying, "Don't open it." But I couldn't just ignore it. Something about it felt wrong, but also urgent. I peeked through the side curtain by the front door, and there she was. A girl, probably our age, soaking wet despite it not having rained. She had this wild look in her eyes. Not crazy, just terrified. She was crying, hands pressed against the glass, whispering something I couldn't hear through the window. I cracked the door just an inch and asked if she was okay. Her voice came out ragged, like she'd been screaming before getting here. "Please, he's coming. He's gonna kill me. Just let me in, please." She kept looking over her shoulder like someone was right behind her. I turned to Haley, who was now standing behind me, barefoot and shaking her head. But I'd never seen someone look so scared before, not in real life. Against my better judgment, I undid the latch and opened the door. The second the door opened fully, everything exploded. 2 guys came out of nowhere. One from the left side of the porch, the other straight from the bushes. They shoved past me like I weighed nothing. One of them slammed me against the wall so hard my shoulder cracked against the drywall. The other yanked Haley by the arm and shoved her onto the couch. Everything happened fast and without a word. They didn't yell or threaten right away. It was like they were moving on instinct, like this wasn't their first time. One of them had a knife. The other, I swear, had what looked like a small hammer. The girl stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide. One of the guys turned to her and yelled, "Close the damn door!" She flinched and obeyed, locking it behind her. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just some random stranger. She was part of it. My brain was still catching up when the guy with the knife grabbed Haley's phone from the armrest and tossed it against the wall. Then he looked at me and said, "Where's your cash?" I told him we didn't have any, which was the truth. But that didn't stop them from tearing the place apart. They weren't just looking for money. They took Haley's laptop, the little Bluetooth speaker we had, even a drawer full of old chargers and cords. One of them pulled our tiny flat screen from the wall and dropped it on the floor when he realized it wasn't a smart TV. The girl just stood there, shaking. She didn't move, didn't help them, didn't say anything, until one of them shoved her toward the bedroom and told her to check the drawers. That's when she snapped. She started crying, really crying this time. Not scared tears like before, but the kind of crying that comes from being completely overwhelmed. She dropped to her knees in the hallway and said, "I didn't know you were going to hurt them." That's when everything shifted. The guy with the hammer got in her face and hissed, "Shut up." But she didn't. She kept crying, rocking back and forth on her knees. It was like she'd broken whatever illusion she was under. That's when I realized she really was scared when she knocked. Not just acting. She thought she was being taken to safety too. Maybe they told her something else. Maybe she was desperate and they used that. Either way, she wasn't the bait. She was baited. And now, we were all in the same nightmare together. The guy with the knife walked over to her, still crouched on the floor, and raised his hand like he was about to hit her. I don't know what came over me, but I shouted, "She didn't do anything!" My voice cracked from the fear. but it was enough to make him pause. He stared at me like I'd just interrupted a scene I had no business being part of. Then, without a word, he turned and told the other guy, "We're done here." Just like that. No more yelling, no more threats. He yanked the girl to her feet by the arm, not gently, and pushed her toward the door. She looked at us, eyes full of some mix of guilt and panic, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. They left as quickly as they came. No car outside. They just vanished into the dark, cutting through the side yard and disappearing behind the neighbor's fence. Haley locked the door behind them with trembling hands. We didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. Just sat on the floor, listening to the silence, waiting for something else to happen. I remember the way the air felt, thick, heavy, like the whole house was still holding its breath. When I finally moved, my shoulder was screaming in pain, and I realized it had probably dislocated from the hit. We didn't have a landline, and both our phones were either dead or destroyed. So I ran next door to Haley's aunt's friend, a guy named Mitch, who sometimes watched the house when the aunt was away. He answered in boxers and a tank top, with a baseball bat in hand. I told him everything in one breath, and he let us use his phone to call the cops. They showed up about 30 minutes later, took photos, asked questions. Didn't say much other than that it probably wasn't random. They never found the guys. And the girl? She didn't match any missing persons reports. It was like she disappeared with them. For weeks after, Haley wouldn't sleep in that house. I don't blame her. We stayed with her cousin in Medford for a while, and eventually she convinced her aunt to rent the place out instead of letting us stay there. I kept having dreams about the girl, not the break-in, not the robbery, just her. Standing outside, soaked, scared, whispering behind the glass. Sometimes she was knocking. Sometimes she was just staring. Sometimes she wasn't even alone. I think what stuck with me the most wasn't the robbery. It was how scared she looked. Like we were all just pieces in something way bigger. I still think about it. Still wonder what really happened that night. What they promised her. What they were trying to do. We were lucky, I know that. They could have done so much worse. But the weirdest part is, I don't think she was evil. I think she was just trapped, caught between her own survival and a plan that spiraled out of control. I'll never know what led her to our door. But I do know this. She wasn't the danger we should have feared. She was the warning we didn't understand in time. I'm James. I'm 39, divorced, and a father to 2 amazing kids, Ellie, 7, and Noah, 5. After the split with my ex-wife 2 years ago, I bought a modest 1-story home in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours. I split custody with my ex every other week, and that particular Thursday night the kids were with me. We just finished watching The Iron Giant for the 100th time, and after they were tucked in, I headed to the kitchen to clean up the leftover popcorn. It was one of those peaceful evenings where everything feels right for a second. You know what I mean? Just ordinary. Safe. It was around 9:45 p.m. when I heard the click. That distinct thunk of the backyard motion sensor light flipping on. I glanced through the kitchen window above the sink. Nothing at first glance, just the usual shadows cast by the oak tree. We've had raccoons before, even a possum once, so I figured it was just another critter snooping around the trash bins. I grabbed my flashlight from the junk drawer, still chewing a piece of gum, and stepped out the back door, barefoot and half distracted. I didn't even bring my phone. I remember the air being weirdly still, like the calm before a thunderstorm, but heavier. I barely made it past the grill when something cracked across the side of my head. It wasn't like in movies, where everything goes black instantly. No, I heard this low hum in my ears as the flashlight clattered across the deck. My vision blurred like I was underwater, and I dropped to my knees before collapsing completely. I remember one clear thought repeating in my head like a siren, "The kids are inside. The kids are inside." Then it all went dark. I came to with my wrists zip-tied behind my back, my ankles bound too tight, and a rank chemical smell burning in my nose. Motor oil maybe, or something sharper. I was in the garage. My garage. I could tell from the cold concrete under my cheek and the faint scent of grass clippings in the corner. The door to the house was ajar, and through it I heard heavy boots, drawers being yanked open, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. But what cut through all of it, what tore through my chest, was the distant, muffled sound of Ellie sobbing and Noah calling out for me. Over and over. I tried to scream, but one of them must have stuffed something in my mouth. My jaw ached like hell. Footsteps approached the garage. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The door creaked wider, and a man stepped in wearing a ski mask and dark clothes. He was tall, maybe 6'2", built like someone who'd done manual labor all his life. His gloves were thick and worn, like the kind you'd use on construction sites. He didn't say anything at first, just crouched in front of me and tilted his head like he was trying to figure out if I was fully awake. Then he grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back. His voice was low and calm, like someone giving instructions at a job site. "You're gonna give me the code to the safe, or I'm going upstairs." Just like that. No yelling, no theatrics, just cold, flat intent. I nodded as much as I could with his grip still on my scalp, and he finally pulled the rag from my mouth. My lips were cracked and sticky from whatever they'd stuffed in. I croaked out the code. I remember I could barely get the numbers out through the panic. 3285. My birthday? Reversed. The guy didn't even look back at me. He stood, left the garage, and slammed the door behind him so hard the sound echoed in my skull. Then came silence. The kind that swells and stretches until it doesn't feel like silence anymore, but something alive, crouching right behind you. After what felt like forever, I started testing the zip ties. My fingers were going numb, and I could feel a cut opening up where the plastic bit into my wrist. I rolled to my side and managed to kick at a metal rake leaning against the wall. It clanged to the floor, but it didn't break the tension in the air. I couldn't hear the kids anymore. That terrified me more than their crying, because silence meant something had changed. Either they were gone, or something had happened to them. That thought made me snap, rage and fear combined. I started thrashing, kicking anything within reach. The lawnmower, a stack of paint cans. I didn't care. I needed to make noise. I needed someone to hear me. Anyone. That's when I heard it. Tires screeching. Not from my driveway, but from down the street. Then another sound, closer, heavier, boots running. The house door swung open again, and another masked guy darted into the garage, grabbed something from the shelf, my tool bag, I think, and bolted back out. A few seconds later, the garage light clicked off. Everything went pitch black. I lay there frozen, listening, waiting. And then came the most haunting sound of the night. Ellie's voice, quivering, whispering my name from somewhere near the kitchen. I can't explain the relief and horror of hearing her voice all at once. Eventually, I heard the sirens. Faint at first, then closer. Closer than I thought they'd be. I later found out it was a neighbor across the street, an older woman named Mrs. Delaney, who had seen shadows moving near her fence and thought someone was trying to steal her garden tools. She never even realized they had broken into my house. By the time the cops kicked the door in and found me in the garage, the guys were long gone. The zip ties had cut deep enough that I needed stitches on both wrists. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was when they brought Ellie and Noah to me, barefoot, shivering, eyes swollen from crying. They hadn't been touched, thank God, but they had seen too much, heard too much. The house was wrecked, Cabinets wide open, drawers dumped, glass everywhere. My bedroom was hit the hardest. They'd taken my laptop, my dad's watch, a gold bracelet my daughter had made me, and my registered handgun. That one really got to me. I kept it locked in the safe for a reason. They'd known it was there, knew the code, knew where everything was. That's what chilled me the most. This wasn't random. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. These guys had watched us, learned our patterns. They'd planned this. Days, maybe weeks of prep. Police confirmed that pretty quickly. The detective showed me screenshots from a neighbor's security camera across the alley. 2 figures had been spotted crouching near our trash bins earlier in the week. They'd even caught one guy pretending to jog past the house multiple times in the afternoon. I remembered him. Gray hoodie, reflective vest, earbuds. Totally unremarkable. And yet he'd probably been memorizing where my kids played, which window stayed cracked open, what time we turned out the lights. We stayed with my sister for a while after that. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Any creak, any light flicker, I was up pacing. I installed cameras, got motion detectors for every damn corner of the yard. My kids wouldn't go near the garage, and I don't blame them. I still check the backyard every night before bed, even though we moved to a new house last year. The scariest part? Nothing ever came of it. The police never caught them. No fingerprints, no suspects. They vanished like smoke. And sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I wonder if they ever looked at us again. If someone else's motion light clicked on the next night, and someone else stepped barefoot into the dark, never knowing they were being watched. I don't usually post things like this, but what happened to me still makes my skin crawl, and I think about it every single time I go to bed. My name's Madison. I'm 21, and at the time this happened, I was in my junior year at a state college in Oregon, renting an old 2-story house off campus with 2 friends, Riley and Jess. It was the kind of place that looked charming during the day. Big porch, ivy on the fence, wood floors, but got a little too quiet at night. I stayed in the smallest room on the 2nd floor, barely enough space for a bed, a desk, and one small window that always stuck when you tried to open it. It was the first time I'd ever lived away from home, and up until that weekend, nothing truly scary had ever happened to me. That Friday, both Riley and Jess left for a trip to Seattle, some music festival I didn't care about. I had a couple of exams coming up and figured it'd be a good chance to study without distractions. I wasn't scared to be alone. I actually liked the idea of having the whole place to myself. That night I made some pasta, threw on a hoodie, and settled into my notes with a glass of wine. Everything felt normal. Around midnight, I got ready for bed, double-checked that the front and back doors were locked, and climbed under the covers with my laptop still playing some dumb sitcom in the background. I remember feeling oddly alert, like I hadn't burned through enough energy during the day. It was sometime after 1 a.m. when I started to feel off. Not scared exactly, just this weird tension in my chest, like my body knew something wasn't right before my brain caught up. I had turned off the TV and the room was dead quiet, except for the occasional creak of the house settling. I was lying on my side, half asleep, when I heard what sounded like breathing. Faint, slow. Not mine. I held my own breath to be sure, and I swear on everything. I still heard it. Just this low, steady inhale and exhale, like someone trying to stay hidden but not quite pulling it off. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I have anxiety, and sometimes my brain likes to pull this kind of crap on me when I'm overtired. So I tried to ignore it. Rolled onto my back, pulled the blanket up to my chin, stared at the ceiling. But then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. My bed has a long black skirt that nearly touches the floor on all sides. I hadn't moved in a while, and yet I saw it shift. just the tiniest movement near the bottom corner like a breeze had passed through, but there was no window open. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. I shot up, didn't even grab my phone, just bolted out the bedroom door barefoot and ran down the street to the neighbor's house in my pajamas, hammering on their door until they opened it. The neighbors, a middle-aged couple I barely knew, let me in without asking too many questions. I must have looked completely unhinged, standing there barefoot and shaking, but I managed to get the words out. "There's someone under my bed." They called the police immediately while I sat on their couch, trying to slow my breathing. I remember staring at their ticking wall clock, counting each second like it mattered, like every tick was a reminder that I had almost stayed in that room one more minute. It felt like I was watching myself from the outside, like none of it was real yet. I was stuck in that foggy place your brain goes before the fear actually settles into something solid. When the cops arrived, two of them, one older guy and a younger woman, they didn't waste time. I gave them my house key and stayed behind while they went in. I watched from the neighbor's window, every light in the house flicking on one by one as they cleared each room. I kept expecting them to come back out and tell me it was nothing, that maybe I'd heard the pipes or a raccoon under the floorboards or something. But then the female officer came out, holding her radio to her shoulder, and she looked tense, focused. That's when my stomach really dropped. A few minutes later, they walked out with someone in handcuffs. It was a man, thin, maybe mid-40s, with a sunken face and a patchy beard. He looked like he hadn't had a proper shower in weeks, maybe months. His clothes were filthy, layers of old jackets and sweatpants, the kind you'd expect to see on someone living on the street. He didn't say a word as they loaded him into the back of the squad car. I couldn't believe it. There was a real person in my room, hiding under my bed while I slept. The cops said he didn't fight back, didn't say anything, just stared at them while they pulled him out. They found him curled on his side, like he'd been lying there a while. The part that really haunts me, what keeps me up at night even now, is what they found with him. He had a small backpack under the bed, stuffed with random things: a dull kitchen knife, a length of yellow rope, and a spiral notebook. Inside the notebook was a handwritten schedule. My schedule. Class times, library sessions, even notes like leaves house alone around 3 p.m. and usually home by 9 unless it's Thursday. He had been watching me, not us, me, for weeks, maybe longer. I remember feeling like my whole body was vibrating when the officer told me that. I had never noticed anything strange. No weird guys on campus, no one hanging outside the house. He had been completely invisible until that night. The police later told me he was homeless, and they suspected he'd been squatting in abandoned properties around the neighborhood. But our house wasn't abandoned. We lived there. He had probably gotten in through the basement window, one we never locked properly because we thought, stupidly, that no one would ever go down there. It's terrifying to realize that while I was showering, cooking, sleeping, he might have been right beneath my feet, maybe even moving around when we were all gone. The officers said the only reason he didn't hurt me that night might have been because I left the room before he expected me to. That thought still makes me sick. I didn't sleep at the house again after that. My roommates were as freaked out as I was, maybe more, especially Jess. Her bedroom was right next to mine. We all stayed with friends for a while until we broke the lease early. I moved back home with my parents for a few months after that and started doing all my classes remotely. I couldn't focus, couldn't be alone. Every creak or distant voice made me jump. I kept replaying that moment when I saw the bed skirt move, wondering how close I came to something unspeakable. I've been in therapy since, and it's helped, but I still check under my bed every single night, without fail. The most disturbing part is that he never said why. He never explained what he wanted or what he planned to do. He refused to speak to police after his arrest. The last I heard, he was being held for a psychological evaluation, They weren't even sure if he'd be charged or committed. The thought that he could get out someday, slip away again, maybe find someone else to stalk, it's a shadow that never fully goes away. I try not to obsess over it, but it lives in the background of my mind, like a bad smell you can't track down. You learn to live with the fear, but it never really disappears. I'm sharing this because I used to think these kinds of stories only happened in movies, or to other people in faraway places. But it happened to me, in a regular college town, in a regular house. And the scariest thing is, if I hadn't gotten out of bed when I did, if I had waited even one more minute, I might not be here to tell this story. Please, check your windows, your locks, your basements. And for the love of God, check under your bed. I'm not the kind of guy who shares things online, especially not personal stuff. But what happened to me last winter? I don't know, man. I haven't slept right since. I'm Brian, 42, laid off from a warehouse job I worked for almost 2 decades. Quiet guy, divorced, no kids. I've been living alone in a duplex on the edge of town. Not a bad place, but kind of isolated, especially in the colder months. Winters here hit hard. Snow drifts pile up against doors, and silence gets so thick it presses on your chest. That night, it was close to 0 outside, wind howling like it was alive. I was bundled up inside, half watching reruns and half thinking about how I was going to stretch unemployment another month. It started with a soft knock. Just 2 quick taps, nothing loud, barely there. I paused the TV, thinking maybe a neighbor needed help. It was late, past 10, but people here mostly look out for each other. I opened the curtain a little but didn't see anyone. A minute passed. Then the knock again, same thing. Light, weirdly gentle. And still, no one at the door. I figured maybe a kid playing a prank, but who the hell lets their kid out in a storm like that? I stood there with the remote in my hand, staring at the door, that off-white paint chipped near the knob, and I swear to God I felt something off in the air, like the quiet was too tight. I didn't open the door the first time. I waited, stared through the peephole, saw nothing. But the knocks came again, and again, every couple of minutes, always the same, soft, spaced out, followed by silence. Eventually, I cracked the door open, just a bit. I didn't even unhook the chain. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. That's when I noticed footprints in the snow. They were fresh, right up to the doorstep, but leading nowhere. No return prints. That meant whoever knocked was still there, watching, hiding. I shut the door fast and locked it, heart pounding now, and I don't scare easy. I wish I'd trusted that gut feeling and stayed put. But something in me, it was part concern, part frustration, made me open the door just a little wider the next time. Dumb, I know. I barely cracked it when it burst open with this jolt of freezing air, and a figure shoved through so fast I didn't even get a look at his face at first. I fell back hard on the floor, knocked the wind out of me. The guy was tall, wearing all black, and a weird mask, like something homemade, cloth stitched together, almost like a winter balaclava, but off. He didn't say anything at first, just slammed the door shut behind him and locked it. Then he turned to me and finally spoke. Calm. Too calm. "Where are your car keys?" I was still on the floor, trying to catch my breath, when I realized he wasn't twitchy or frantic like you'd expect from someone robbing a place. He was deliberate, like he wasn't just there for a quick grab and go. I pointed to the hook by the door where my keys were hanging, and he walked over slowly, eyes locked on me the whole time through that stitched mask. But he didn't grab them right away. Instead, he picked them up, jangled them in his gloved hand, then looked back at me and said, "You haven't been outside all day, right?" The way he said it It wasn't a question. It felt like a statement, like he knew. That's when I really started to panic. This wasn't a random break-in. He'd been watching me. Maybe longer than just tonight. I scrambled up and back toward the hallway. "Take whatever you want," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked halfway through. He started walking toward me, slow, steady, and said, "It's not about what I want. It's about what's owed." I didn't know what the hell that meant. My brain was racing, trying to connect dots that didn't exist. My heart was in my throat. I turned and bolted for the bathroom, slammed the door shut, locked it, and shoved my shoulder against it with everything I had. The bathroom window was too small to crawl through, and it was frosted shut anyway. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. I tried to explain through the panic. Home invasion, masked man, he's still inside. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden and that officers were on the way. I could hear the guy moving around, calm footsteps, slow pacing. Every so often, he'd stop and say things under his breath I couldn't make out. Once, he came right up to the door and whispered, "You've got the wrong house, don't you?" I didn't respond. I just pressed my hand tighter over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The waiting felt endless. I kept checking the time on my phone, 7 minutes, then 10. The footsteps kept shifting, kitchen, living room, hallway, back door. I could hear him trying the windows too, one by one. At one point, I thought he'd left because it got real quiet. Then something scraped against the door. I think he dragged a chair over and just sat outside the bathroom waiting. I didn't dare speak or move. When I finally heard the police banging at the front door and yelling, "This is the police! Open up!" I almost cried. By the time they broke in and reached me, the guy was gone, just vanished. At first I thought maybe I imagined it, but the police took it seriously. They found the front door unlocked. He must have slipped out right before they came in. But here's the part that really got to me. When they started checking around the house, one of the officers called me over to look. There were footprints in the snow, all right, but not just leading to the front door. They circled the entire duplex, around the back, around the side, even by the tiny basement windows. The guy had been trying every possible way in, not just knocking. He'd been testing me, watching how I responded, waiting for me to open the door. The knocking was just the beginning. They estimated he'd been circling my place for over an hour before I even noticed the first knock. The footprints were layered in some spots, like he'd stood still in certain areas for long stretches, especially near the living room window. I kept replaying everything in my head. The soft knocks, the weird calm voice, the comment about me not going outside. He must have been watching the whole time, from somewhere close. And the thing is, nothing was missing. He didn't take my wallet, my phone, anything from the kitchen. Just asked for the keys and said something cryptic. The cops dusted for prints but said the gloves and mask made it useless. I stayed with my sister for a while after that. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in that house. I'd wake up from nightmares of slow knocks or that stitched mask staring at me through the window. Eventually, I moved to a small apartment complex downtown. Somewhere with neighbors on all sides and cameras at every entrance. I bought better locks. I installed motion lights, but I still double-check the doors every night. And when winter comes and the wind starts howling again, I keep the TV on louder. I keep my phone closer. I don't answer the door after dark. The police never found him. No one else in the neighborhood reported anything that night. It was like I was the only one he targeted. I never figured out what he meant by what's owed. I didn't recognize the voice. I didn't owe anyone money. But here's the part that really messes with me. A few weeks after I moved out, I went back to grab a box I'd left in the attic. The new tenant hadn't moved in yet. I found something tucked behind the water heater in the basement crawl space. A small, crumpled piece of black fabric, stitched into a mask. I didn't tell anyone. I just threw it in the trash and walked out. I don't know how long it had been there. I don't want to know. I've lived alone for most of my adult life, and I never minded it. My name's Samantha. People call me Sam, and I'm 40 now. I work remotely as a graphic designer and live in a small farmhouse on the edge of town in northern Missouri. It's the kind of place where the nights are black as ink, the stars look close enough to touch, and the silence feels like a blanket over everything. There are no close neighbors, just a few empty fields, a rundown barn across the way, and a thin tree line at the edge of the property that marks the beginning of a wooded area. I've always loved the quiet. I never thought it would turn against me. This happened last September. I remember because the nights had just started getting cold again, and I was wearing my favorite oversized hoodie with coffee stains on the sleeve. That night, I'd gone to bed around midnight with my German Shepherd Maggie curled up at the foot of the bed. Nothing felt off. I had all the doors locked, windows shut, security lights on. Same routine I'd followed every night for years. At 1:08 a.m., I woke up without really knowing why. It wasn't a noise exactly, more like a shift in the air. Maggie was already alert, ears perked, her body rigid like a coiled spring. Then I saw it. Through the window above the sink, a flashlight just past the tree line. It wasn't someone walking with it. It wasn't swaying naturally, like from someone's hand. It moved too slowly. It hovered, flickering slightly like the batteries were dying, and it stayed just inside the edge of the trees, back and forth, like it was searching for something. I stood frozen at the window, not even realizing I was holding my breath. It moved across the far end of the yard, maybe 50 feet out, then blinked off. I waited for it to come back. It didn't. For a few minutes I just stood there, watching the dark, expecting to see it again. But it was gone. No footsteps, no sounds. Just gone. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the bedroom light off and sat on the edge of the bed with Maggie, both of us facing the window. I kept telling myself maybe it was a hunter, or someone from the nearby town who got lost, though that made no sense. You don't wander onto private land with a flashlight in the middle of the night. Not that deep in. At some point I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is Maggie growling, low and deep. And then I heard it. The back screen door creaking open. Not the front door, the back, the one no one ever uses. It wasn't a dream. I heard the distinct click of the screen door latch, slow like someone easing it open without wanting to make noise. My body just reacted. I grabbed Maggie by the collar and yanked her with me toward the pantry. It's the only place in the house with no windows, and it's tucked in the corner off the kitchen. I didn't even grab my phone from the nightstand. I had left it charging on the counter, which meant I had to crawl across the dark kitchen to get it, every step feeling like I was walking through syrup. Maggie didn't bark, but she was tense, vibrating with a quiet growl. I could feel her heart pounding against my leg as I pulled the door shut behind us. I dialed 911 with trembling hands, whispering into the receiver. I told them someone was in my house, or just outside. I couldn't tell. The dispatcher kept asking questions I could barely answer. I don't know how long we were in that pantry, but every second felt like hours. I could hear the boards on the back porch creak under someone's weight. Once, I swear I heard something brush against the kitchen window like a sleeve or a hand. I kept thinking, if he opens that door, if he says anything, I'm going to lose it. Maggie stayed quiet the whole time, like she knew silence was the only thing keeping us safe. The cops arrived fast. They didn't find anyone inside the house or even around the property, but they found something else. Footprints, dozens of them. The officer called me outside when it was safe and showed me with his flashlight. They were all over the soft dirt around my house, outside the kitchen window, under the bedroom window, near the garage, even by the broken fence post that leads into the trees, all around, as if someone had been circling, watching, waiting. They looked fresh, clear boot prints, heavy, like from a man. And then the part that still chills me. Every single camera I had around the house had been unplugged. Not ripped out, not broken. Just unplugged, calmly, deliberately. I checked the footage the next day, or tried to. Nothing had been recorded. My motion-activated system goes to a cloud backup, except it only does that if the camera gets triggered. But if the cameras were off before anything happened, there was nothing to upload. I checked the cords, and it was like someone knew exactly where each one was. Even the small one I had tucked under the eaves of the roof. That one had its power cord cut cleanly, like with wire cutters. Whoever this was, they'd planned it. They didn't just stumble onto my property. They came knowing where things were. That's what scared me more than anything. This wasn't random. I spent the rest of that night at a friend's place. I couldn't bring myself to stay there alone, not after realizing that someone had walked the entire perimeter of my home while I slept. The next morning, I had a security company out to install a whole new system, wired, with backup batteries and cellular alerts. I also got motion lights that trigger from even small movements, but no matter what I added, the house never felt the same again. That illusion of safety was gone. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. Every gust of wind against the siding made Maggie bark. It was like we were living in a bubble of constant tension. What really messes with my head is that nothing was taken. No doors were forced open. No windows broken. It was like, whoever it was, they didn't come to steal. They came to watch, to scare, or maybe worse. And I'll never forget the flashlight out by the trees. It didn't behave like someone walking. It glided, too smooth, too intentional. I sometimes think about whether it was a person holding it or if it was something else. But the boot prints say otherwise. It was a man, a big one. The cops took plaster casts of a few prints and said they were size 12, maybe 13. Deep heel impressions, heavy set, calm walker. The official report just says, suspicious activity. That's it. No fingerprints, no ID, nothing to go off. And since there was no break-in and no physical harm, the investigation kind of fizzled out. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. The weirdest part? The barn across the field, the one I mentioned earlier? A few days after the incident, I saw the doors wide open. I never use it, and it stays locked. When I checked it, nothing was inside. Just the smell of old hay and something sour, like rotting wood and copper. I found cigarette butts by the door. I don't smoke. Since that night, I've been religious about locking everything. I sleep with Maggie right next to me and a flashlight under my pillow. The new cameras are always online, and I check the footage every morning. Nothing's happened since, but I can't help but wonder if it's because of the upgrades, or because he already got what he wanted, whatever that was. Sometimes I'll be walking the yard in the early evening and feel that same tension in the air I felt that night. The same kind of stillness that wakes you up before something bad happens. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe it was a warning. Or maybe he's still out there, waiting for another night when I let my guard down.